right, Mr. Lipsey. So obviously, I'm sure you're well aware it's 60 years today since the assassination. Just if you would walk me through your sort of connection to everything.
Bess, I had no idea when I got up in the morning 60 years ago today that I'd be a witness to probably the most famous autopsy performed, and the day that will go down in history as the most sad, the saddest day, I'll put it that way, of the 20th century, the day that John Kennedy was assassinated. I got up that morning and took General Wheel, who I worked for, to the office as usual. And it was just a regular day of work for us. And then I took General Wheel home for lunch. I'm sitting outside of his house, waiting for him to come out. And there's a news flash on the radio. President Kennedy has been shot. So I run towards General Wheel's house. He comes running out. At the same time, he heard the same news report. We both get in the car. We head for the White House. And by the time we leave Fort Myer, Virginia, out of Arlington Cemetery area, going across Memorial Bridge, the news comes off, the president is dead. So we head to the White House, we go to the White House. At that point, there's nothing we can do. Mrs. Lincoln, who is the president's secretary, asked us to go and start making plans for a state funeral. So we went to our office at Fort McNair, and General Wheel, we had the operation chiefs of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Washington, D.C. police, all gathered in one room. And we started it just a little bit after 2 p.m. that day, making plans on what to do when the body was returned to Washington and what would happen thereafter. The body did get in at about 6:30 that night or so, and we took it immediately from Andrews Air Force Base to Bethesda Naval Hospital. General Wheel went upstairs with Jackie Kennedy to 17th floor for them to start, for the general to find out exactly what in particular Jackie would like to happen. I went with the body to the morgue, got the body out of the hearse, took it in. We opened the casket. I helped lift the president's body out and put it on the morgue table. I helped the technicians clean the body off to prepare it for the autopsy. And then after we did that, there was nobody in the room except myself and then a lab technician. 2 doctors came in the room and then started to, and other lab technicians, they did x-rays of the body. They took dozens of photographs, and then the doctors proceeded to start with the autopsy. And I sat there and witnessed the autopsy for nearly 3.5 hours. The autopsy was over, and at that point, General Wheel came down from his visit with Jackie Kennedy. He came into the morgue room. I was the only person in there with the doctors and the body. And then General Wheel said that we needed to prepare. Gawler's funeral home would be there in a few minutes to help start the process of putting President Kennedy's body back together. So at that point, we left the room. I locked the room. I put guards on the door, 2 doors to the morgue. General Wheeler and I rushed back to Fort Myer. We changed from our regular daily uniforms into dress uniforms, came back in literally less than a half an hour to the hospital, unlocked the doors, let Gallard's funeral home come in, and then I sat there no more than 6 to 8 feet from the body and watched Gallard's funeral home repair the body and present the body back for burial. That lasted close to 4 hours by the time they were finished. When they were finished, I helped the 2 men from Gallard's dress President Kennedy. We had sent the general's car to the White House. Jackie had called, told him what she wanted him to be buried in. And we'd gotten his fresh clothes. I helped dress him, lay him in his coffin, and close it. As far as I know, I was the last person to touch his body or to see the president. There is a question that when we got back that morning about 4 a.m., but close to 4:30, to the White House, we went in the East Room where the body was to lay in state for a day. And Jackie and a priest came in the room with myself and 2 or 3 members of the White House staff and one of the members of the Kennedy family. And Jackie asked us all to leave, and she stayed in the room with a priest. We stood outside no less than 5 minutes. She opened the door. So to this day, we don't know whether she opened that casket or not. I doubt it. It was a very heavy casket. But I know she wanted private prayers at time with the priest. At that point, Jackie left, went to her quarters. General Wheel and I left, went back to our BOQ, to his quarters in my BOQ, changed clothes again, and went to our office at about 6 a.m., stayed there to complete the planning for the funeral. And then we were back at the White House by 9 o'clock because we were notified by the Secret Service that dignitaries would start arriving at 10 a.m. to pay respect to President Kennedy. President Eisenhower was still alive. President Truman was still alive. And there was, obviously other dignitaries. So they opened the East Room, and one at a time, these people came in, paid their respects. And so that's basically the 24 hours that went by, a day in history that I just got thrown into. No one ever expected the president to be assassinated. I knew the president. I'd been going and briefing him on dignitaries who were coming to the White House. I worked part-time at night as a social aide to the president, and I'm very friendly with him. It was a shock to me. I'd never seen a dead person much less picking up the body of the President of the United States to prepare for an autopsy. It was just a day that's fixed in my mind that I'll never forget.
Yeah, what was it like? I mean, being in that room, what was sort of the collective emotion when you saw the president put on that autopsy table, or when you physically put him on there?
That's a really good question. When we left General Wheel's office to go to Andrews Air Force Base, unexpectedly, General Wheel reached in this desk drawer and he pulled out two web belts with 45 caliber pistol for me and his personal 32 caliber pistol. And he said, "Richard, put this pistol on your belt. When we get that body off the plane, you're in charge of it. And you make darn sure," and I could use other words, but he said, "you make darn sure that nothing happens to that body because you're going to be responsible for it." So when we got into the autopsy and opened that casket, it was a man that I knew, a man that I certainly respected. And we lifted that body out and put it on the table. I think I was thinking about General Wheel telling me, "Richard, you're responsible for that body. When you don't leave it under any circumstance, and you don't let anybody in that room, and you don't let anybody touch that body except the doctors." And between the emotion of seeing, I would call him a friend, but certainly somebody I was very respectful of on that table, there was not a lot of emotion. I had a job to do. It was a very responsible job. And honestly, I didn't have time to cry or feel anything except deep sorrow. But to this day, I can remember there was really no swelling of overt emotion. It was a time of great responsibility. And I'm just proud that I had a part of it, but it was a day that I wish had not have happened and that I'd never had to be there and watch the autopsy of a president.
Incredible. And I mean, wouldn't happen in this day and age. They wouldn't, I mean, it wouldn't. You would have just the doctors in there, and that's incredible that you got to experience that, as somber as it is. I know y'all are not at home. Do you have access to any photos of maybe you during that time, or you with the president, or maybe Luke can help with that?
I'm not at home now, but yes, when I got out of the Army at the end of December, the very beginning of January of 1964, just literally several weeks after the assassination. About 3 months after I got home and went to work, one day a box arrived, a large box, probably 24 inches by 24 inches by 24 inches. I had no idea what it was. It was from the United States Army, Washington, D.C. And I opened the box, and there were just dozens and dozens of photographs of the president from the time he got to Washington, D.C., and we got him off of the Air Force One all the way through the time we buried him in Arlington Cemetery. And even for the week after that, taking dignitaries like then President Lyndon Johnson, and a few days later, the one I remember most, there were dozens of people we took to Arlington Cemetery, to the burial site, but it was Princess Grace. She was a very good friend of Jackie's, but for some reason, she did not make it to the funeral, but she was there a week later. And there were photographs of General Wheel and myself and Princess Grace standing there before the in the cemetery where President Kennedy was buried. It was on the front page of every paper in the country. And but there were hundreds of photographs. Yes, I've got plenty of photographs of the whole time we were in Washington, and everything from the time that we got the body off the plane to the time we buried him. There's just a series of photographs, you know, that room, being in the East Room that night, and Jackie, General Wheel, and being in the Capitol. And yes, we well documented.
How old were you when all this was happening?
I was just had turned 24 years old.
Wow, that's young. All right. Anything else you wanna add about the experience? I have you've said a lot, so I've got what I need.
The only thing that was unusual is that during the autopsy, I was sitting in the room watching the autopsy. The door opened and a man in a suit came in and came over and sat next to me, and he said, "Lieutenant Lipsey, I need you to sign this." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "This is a Secrecy Act." He introduced himself from the Secretary of State's office. He said, "This is a Secrecy Act. You cannot tell anyone what you saw here today for 15 years under penalty of a $15,000 fine or 10 years in jail." And so for 15 years, I could not tell my parents, my future wife, my family, anyone about what went on in that autopsy. And 15 years and about maybe 2 or 3 days after that, I go into my old store, Steinberg's in Baton Rouge, 8 o'clock in the morning, to unlock the door. And 2 men got out of a car right behind me and walked up, said, "Are you Richard Lipsey?" I said, "Yes." "Were you a lieutenant, United States Army?" And blah, 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 the dates. And I said, "Certainly." "Yes, I am." Said, "We're from the House Committee on we're the attorneys for the House Committee on Assassinations, and we want to interview you about what happened that day."
Wow.
And so we sat there in my office for several hours and did that. And that just kind of opened up the door for me to tell my family, other people, what I'd seen. It was very difficult, Bess, I will tell you that, because really for 15 years, not speaking of it, knowing I could not speak of it, it was just put out of my mind, literally. And I had to, thank goodness, I had all the pictures, I had my notes, I had everything, but I had referred to them in 15 years. So it took a little bit to bring it all back and put it together.